friends, welcome to the 78th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. Journey has been wonderful and at times stressful. So today we thought we'll have a hiatus from, or rather a break from the regular pattern of 100% legal things. We'll have something connected with our profession and the legal justice dispensation machinery altogether. We have a wonderful speaker and introduced to this platform by yet another wonderful speaker whom we had earlier, Dr. Amit George. I place on record our sincere thanks for to Dr. Amit George for introducing Sri Chaitanya Puri, who was a lawyer and is still a lawyer at heart, but today he'll help us out with all this stress and stress management. I think we are going to have a wonderful session. Like today morning, I had a message from Justice Roshan Dalvi, wherein she just sent me a clip saying she had taken showed us earlier in her presentation regarding how stress etc. could be managed and how it can be interpreted. Wonderful. Let us have a very interactive session. And anybody who wants to put questions, please put the hand icon so that I can unmute them. For the time being, I muted everybody. So we recognize the presence of Justice V. Ramkumar, Justice Roshan Dalvi, and all other wonderful participants. Directly on to you, Sri Chaitanya Puri sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chaitanya Puri. I'd like to thank Shyam Padman sir and the fantastic initiative of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series for giving me this opportunity to speak today. And thank you to everyone for taking out the time for this discussion. Now, Shyam sir, should I just start with the presentation or is there something else?
You can, all yours. Now, next 1 hour, it's yours. We are just listeners.
Very well, sir. Thank you so much. All right.
You can discussion is good.
All right. Now, before I, start with the presentation, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a life and business coach, a relationship guide, and a certified neuro-linguistic practitioner. I've also previously been a lawyer, as Shyam mentioned, but my ultimate passion lies in the field of personal development and helping people achieve their best versions and their goals. I'm also an entrepreneur, writer, and public speaker. On a lighter note, I love traveling. I'm a certified scuba diver, former national level tennis player, someone who's done commercial theater, and an absolute foodie. So before we really get into the discussions, I'll request each one of you to just close your eyes for a moment and imagine 2 scenarios that I'll narrate to you now. Scenario number 1. Imagine that there's only 10 minutes left before the court starts. You're the first matter in court. You've parked your car and now you're walking to the court compound. Suddenly, as you're crossing the road, you notice that a speeding car is heading towards you. Now, something in that split second tells you that you need to move away as fast as possible. You run, you almost dive to safety. You'll notice that your heartbeat elevates, you start sweating, your breathing becomes labored, you're stressed now. Scenario number 2. It's the same facts. Imagine there's only 10 minutes left before court starts. You're the first matter before court. But this time you met with some unexpected traffic on the way. You're still about 5 minutes away from court. Now you're concerned about reaching the court on time. Now that you're already fretting, a sense of dread fills you as you wonder, did I keep that case file with the critical judgments or not? Now you're not sure and there isn't enough time to print more copies now. You'll notice that your heartbeat elevates, you start sweating, your breathing becomes labor, you're stressed now as well. So it's a similar physiological response in both the scenarios, right? Why? What's the difference between the 2 scenarios? Well, in the first scenario, something actually happened. You narrowly missed being run over. So the stress response from your body was warranted. But in the second scenario, you created nervousness because you presumed that you may have forgotten something relevant. In both these scenarios, the physical outcome was almost exactly alike. But in the first scenario, there was an actual threat, while in the second scenario, there was a perceived threat. But don't worry. In either scenario, there's nothing wrong with you. You see, we are descendants of frightened people. early humans had brains that were wired to react to potential dangers and produce a strong fear response, because cautious behavior increased their chances of survival, and these genes of being cautious and frightened have been passed on to us. On the other hand, early humans who were too calm to say, whether a lion was passing nearby, were less likely to survive and pass on their genes. So through this natural selection, humans living today are descendants of people who were able to produce a very effective fear response. It's clear that our brain is a protector for us. The moment our brain senses danger or a threat, it will immediately trigger a response from us. And this is that response which we commonly call the fight or flight response. We must understand that being anxious is an important part of the human experience, because our anxiety and our stress is often an outcome of those essential factors of our life that we deeply care about, like our loved ones, our health, our survival, our reputation, and the ability to be valued by and bonded to other people. So what we can attempt to do today is to understand stress and anxiety better, so that as individuals, we can learn to appreciate our range of emotions and our reactions and have an actionable plan to reduce anxiety's hold over us. While I understand most of our panelists and the people who will be listening will be lawyers, but let's have a mini biology class for this. I don't mean to torture you, but an understanding of this basic anatomy will help us make much more sense of our reactions. So there are two parts of the brain that I wish to go over: the cortex and the amygdala, as you can see on the slide. The cortex is that part of the brain that fills the topmost part of the skull, right here. It's the thinking part of the brain. This part enables us to reason, create language, engage in complicated thinking, logic, or mathematics. Species that have a large cerebral cortex are often thought to be more intelligent than others. Now, the amygdala, on the other hand, are two small almond-shaped structures located in the center of the brain. This amygdala is responsible for triggering the fight or flight response, which has been passed down virtually unchanged. So the amygdala becomes the reaction part of the brain. Any stressful situation is processed by the brain through one of two pathways. And how our brain reacts to stress and anxiety is determined by which pathway is followed by the brain. So the two pathways that you can see on your slide are the amygdala pathway, which is in red, and the cortex plus amygdala pathway, which is in blue. Let's look at the one in red first, the amygdala pathway. See, when you're experiencing actual threat, your fight or flight response is triggered by the amygdala, the reaction part of the brain. This is where our brain is actually wired to act instead of reason. So at this point, the amygdala is in the driver's seat and you are a passenger with no control. The reason behind the amygdala being able to exert a powerful and immediate effect on the body and override other brain processes like logic and reasoning is because it enables us to take a quick decision to survive. So when a car is almost about to run you over, instead of logically thinking about the car's velocity or the menacing expression on the driver's face, your amygdala is triggered, which makes you leap to save yourself. So it basically bypasses the useless information and goes directly to the action to be taken to ensure our safety. So we can obviously agree that this response is necessary for our survival. Now the other pathway, which is the cortex plus amygdala pathway, is one where the brain's response circuitry moves via the cortex to the amygdala. So from the thinking part of the brain to the reaction part of the brain. So you remember the perceived threat scenario that we discussed about probably forgetting the judgments folder. In similar situations like that, where there isn't any real threat, but you're worrying, you're engaging in obsessive compulsive thoughts, and your interpretations are often exaggerated, your cortex or thinking brain has been activated. If you keep doing this long enough, your amygdala, which is the reaction part, will also get triggered because that's the pathway. And as we know, once the amygdala gets triggered, you have little or no control over your emotions or your reactions. So the cortex and amygdala pathway, as opposed to the amygdala pathway, is a more conscious pathway because we have some control and awareness of our thinking and how we are reacting. This pathway gives us the freedom to consciously observe our thoughts and accordingly redirect them for our benefit. So now let's dive deeper into what is stress and anxiety. Simply put, stress is the surge of chemicals and hormones through our bodies when we perceive a threat or face an actual threat. Excessive stress can damage the brain, which could lead to problems with memory, anxiety, panics, phobias, and even functional problems. Now, there are different types of stresses, right? The first one is acute stress, as you can see on the slide. And the second one is chronic stress. Acute stress is short-term stress. Examples would be getting stuck in traffic, or having an argument with your spouse, or criticism from your boss. Your body is good at handling episodes of acute stress. Our blood pressure, the heart rate, breathing rate, levels of muscle tension, they may skyrocket for a while, but they quickly return back to their normal levels. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is long-term stress. So if you get stuck in numerous traffic jams daily, or you've been in a bad relationship for months and you argue with your spouse constantly, or you work in a toxic work environment, these are all examples of chronic stress. The body is not so good at handling chronic stress. Over time, when your body is in a resting state, your heart rate, blood pressure, levels of muscle tension, they remain elevated. So your body has to work even harder despite being in a rested state. This is obviously not healthy. This can snowball into a host of health problems, including high BP, heart diseases, chronic pain, diabetes, low immunity, and even depression. The question is now, is stress good or bad? Now, if you feel that stress is good, type in the message in the chat section, it's good. If you think it's bad, type it's bad. If you think both, type both. If you think neither, type neither. Let's take 5 or 6 seconds and let's see what people answer. All right. The correct answer is both. Unfortunately, the word stress has been long associated as something negative, harmful, and damaging only. And this is not true. Stress is a concept that has a very wide spectrum, ranging from good to bad. Stress is of different intensities, and how stress affects our lives is primarily based on the intensities of the stress in question. So now let's look at the intensities of stress. There are three intensities. The first one is understimulation or new stress, which you can see in green. The second one is optimum stimulation or eustress. And the third one is overstimulation or distress. Let's deal with new stress first. So new stress or understimulation is neutral stress. This refers to a state which doesn't have an actual impact and is largely inconsequential or unimportant to a person. This is effectively a state where stimulation is minimum. In the slide, you can see a chart with new stress in green. Seeing where it lies between the two axes, it can be understood that this is where performance and the amount of stress both are low. So this state of understimulation causes emotions like boredom, fatigue, frustration, dissatisfaction. People who are generally not passionate about their work or relationship or other aspects of their life are in a state of new stress where they are not motivated to act. The second intensity is eustress or optimum stimulation. This is good stress. This stress makes us feel satisfaction, fulfillment, and meaning. This is where performance is at its peak and stress is not overwhelming. Achievers and high performers use this state to push out of their comfort zone and feel excited and positively challenged about a task. So it's the perfect kind of nervous energy which kicks you into a magic gear. That's why many people who say do theater or speak publicly often say, I feel alive when I do such and such. Now, an example that all our advocate friends would be able to relate to, especially during the initial days at the bar. Imagine this scenario that you're in court. Yours is the next matter. Now, your arguing counsel is stuck in another court. But you know this matter inside out. Now, the matter gets called out and you start explaining your case. Your first 5 seconds, you're telling yourself, don't sound stupid. That's all. That's the only brief you're giving yourself. After 10 seconds, you feel, this is not so bad. But after about a minute, you tell yourself, I am not going to hold back. This is my moment. At this stage, your body is tense and extremely alert. Words are being processed in your head like never before. You'll realize later that your voice and delivery was very different from how you normally talk. This feeling that you're experiencing is eustress. So this is a super zone of stress that makes us feel motivated and excited to work towards our goals. Similarly, eustress at work includes tasks which drive us to leverage our existing skills or learn new ones. This normally operates for those projects where deadlines are challenging but realistic. But in situations where there are unrealistic deadlines or very heavy workloads, where you have to juggle many tasks at once, there is overstimulation of our stress response, which leads us to our next intensity of stress called distress, which you can see in red. Distress is bad stress. And as you can see, the performance on the slide, you can see the performance is low, but the amount of stress is maximum on the axis. And it is distress that could lead to anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and even decrease in work performance. Now, there's some factors which causing work-related distress could be being unhappy in your job, having a very heavy workload, very long working hours over time, facing discrimination or harassment at work, interpersonal conflicts, etc. So many other examples. Now, before we look into how to handle distress, let's understand a little bit about distress's ugly cousin, anxiety. Anxiety is a more intensified version of distress. It has many different forms like obsessive compulsive disorders, post-traumatic stress syndrome, panic attacks, phobias, and generalized anxiety disorders. Generalized anxiety disorders are the most common ones, which pertain to not a specific incident, but generally can be triggered anytime. Studies have shown that women are more likely to be affected by anxiety than men. There are many common symptoms of distress and anxiety. However, the symptoms of anxiety are prolonged and more severe, and over time can cause significant impairment in physical, social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. And the reason anxiety can be debilitating is because it's typically characterized by a persistent feeling of dread or apprehension in situations that are not actually threatening. If you see the slide before you, you can see some of the common symptoms of stress and anxiety. There's sleep disturbance, back or neck pain, frequent illness, irritability, excessive worry, rapid heart rate, poor concentration, so many more. Now let's deal with the main issue for this discussion. I'll address the younger members of the bar first. Now, this profession has an influx of thousands of young lawyers every year. Many of them are eager to be of value to their new organizations or seniors. They jump at the opportunity to get work. They realize that maybe within a year or two, they could even advise successful business people who are so much older to them. That's a good high. They also envision themselves arguing before a bench, possibly even softly muttering the arguments of their seniors under their breath as the seniors argue. I've done that. They're desperate to enter the main stage from the sidelines and perform before a packed court. Amongst these youngsters, as time progresses, a visible distinction appears in 3 broad categories. Firstly, the ones who take no stress at all. Secondly, who take some stress. And thirdly, who take too much stress. Now, the first category who take no stress at all are in new stress. And as we know, because the minimum amount of stress that they're permitting themselves is not challenging enough to grow and become better, it's under stimulation. The second category of people who take some stress are under the state of eustress. They look at newer tasks as exciting challenges, which help them leverage demanding situations and convert them into advantages. The third category who take too much stress are in the state of distress and are overwhelmed and feel inadequate or even unsuitable for the profession, for the legal profession. Now, for this category of youngsters, stress ceases to remain a challenge and looks like a threat. But it's clear that some stress is required to create an energy of performance. But too little or too much stress is counterproductive. So the idea is to ensure that there is a constant awareness in each one of us about the amount of stress we are permitting ourselves. Apart from self-regulation, another approach that could ensure eustress be achieved more often by more people would be if it's institutionally more welcoming, especially from seniors of the organization. Now, interestingly, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, while delivering a keynote address at Harvard Law School on the topic, the corporate legal sector's impact on India, said that change on an institutional level requires creation of support structures, a massive change in our attitude, and destigmatization of the mental health issues amongst members of the profession. He further suggested that law firms in India definitely need to be more sensitive to the somewhere unsatisfactory work culture that may be there and a complete lack of work-life balance. We currently display a warped approach towards stress and anxiety, especially in this profession. It's like we like to boast about who has it worse in their organization. My working hours are crazy. Really? What time do you get home? I reach home at 11 every night. That's nothing. I reach home at 2. So I guess my story is worse. It's like we glamorize who has more stress and anxiety in their kitty, like it's a reward. We like to fool ourselves that the only way you will succeed in battle is with post-traumatic stress disorder. No. In today's day and age, when drones can do most of the shootings, we need to upgrade our primitive thinking and understanding of stress and anxiety as well. So killing yourself slowly under pressure is not a medal worth wearing and certainly not the right mindset to pass on to the next generation of legal professionals. I've known many people who feel that they have an obligation to go on despite certain ill effects on their health. Why? Because they feel that, well, I've invested so much now that I can't back out now. It's too much investment. There are two ways to deal with this. Either you take a break and figure out what you actually want to do, or figure out a way to decompress and rid yourself of the stress and anxiety that we take as a given in this profession. I've seen young advocates crying over the phones to their seniors, apologizing because they could not, get to the filing counter 1 minute after it got closed. Now give that young advocate this grief for a few years and see that person's passion completely evaporate. It's a simple equation. Work performance and confidence become optimum when a person is able to attain eustress. And an environment which creates eustress and where colleagues are able to destigmatize issues like stress and anxiety will simply lead to higher performance. So, how to sustain quality in the legal profession? What will help sustain long-term quality in this profession is a holistic balance between pressure and the methods to deal with it. For all those of us who may have a team of juniors working under us, you must create an environment for them to come and speak openly and not feel hesitant. You should make them feel not guilty for seeking to try to live a life of balance in their prime. Is it a crime to live and explore at the peak of your youth? It's extremely clear that positive reinforcements work much better than negative reinforcements. And if today majority of parents adopt the approach of not using any violence against their child while raising them, then why are we open to let our professional minors handle some violent internal thoughts all by themselves? And if they muster up the courage to speak up or confide, they're labeled as weak. As an industry, we have to try keeping an open door policy and encourage emotional well-being, especially amongst the younger lot. And we will see their confidence and most importantly, their work product improve. Isn't that really a win-win? Now imagine if these methods were openly discussed and the taboo that comes with stress and anxiety is eliminated. Imagine the bond of fraternity that we can create for the juniors if they feel that the seniors have their back. That's true leadership. If we as seniors are able to create a legacy of care, nurture, and support for our juniors, there's no reason that they will not do everything in their capacity to give back to the leaders. So let's pass this legacy on to the juniors and let them improve upon it. That's the best inheritance we can give them. What I'm trying to say is this. Let's not let mental health be a price for success in the legal profession. That's too heavy for anyone's conscience. And by now we all are aware that our physical and our mental health and fitness have a direct correlation to managing stress and anxiety. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. A healthy lifestyle creates multiple systems of releasing stress and anxiety on a regular basis, which prevents a burnout. So let's just quickly look at some healthy lifestyle choices. The first one is take a moment to breathe. There's enough research which demonstrates a direct correlation between deep breathing and the health of your brain. So schedule time during the day to practice deep breathing. And when you're stressed, stop everything, take a moment and breathe deeply. One simple technique is to inhale for a count of 4, hold for 4 and exhale for 4. So keep repeating that till you feel more relaxed. Second one, practice mindfulness and meditation. Now, mindfulness can mean different things to different people. But to put it very simply, mindfulness is the state of being still and to observe your thoughts. This could mean being aware of your senses in the moment with the primary focus on your breathing cycle. Also, meditation, which is considered a form of mindfulness itself, it helps shrink the amygdala, the reaction part of the brain. The larger the amygdala, the stronger the reactions to stress and anxiety. The smaller the amygdala, the milder the reactions to stress and anxiety. So please think of meditation as an exercise for your brain, which not only helps increase focus, but also reduce stress. The third one, exercise. We all understand that daily exercise is the best anxiety inhibitor because it releases feel-good chemicals in your brain. Making exercise a daily habit can protect you from undesirable reactions to stressful events. It's just a natural way to inject happy feelings with no side effects. And then, of course, dietary changes, reduce the intake of caffeine, alcohol, and other sugary drinks. They stimulate the nervous system and they increase anxiety. The fifth one is, this is very interesting, keep a journal. Write down your feelings. They help you declutter and streamline your thoughts. Sometimes articulating what you feel really helps one face and deal with the emotion. So some of the greatest personalities in history have maintained the habit of noting their thoughts in a journal. And that habit didn't change even after they became successful, which tells us about the power of this habit. The sixth one is unwind. Choose a schedule that helps you include activities that help you relax. It could be listening to music, taking a shower, maybe a leisure walk, anything that relaxes you. And the next one is redirect energies to hobbies. Research has shown that engaging your mind in a skill-based activity helps in improving brain health. This is called being in a flow state. You are immersed in that activity and you basically lose track of time. So schedule some time in the week to engage in such hobbies, which pique your interest or something that you've been postponing to learn for the last decade. Like pick up a guitar and learn. The next one is talk to someone you trust. Support systems work like magic. Sometimes just speaking with a trusted circle can help alleviate stress. Unfortunately, many people look at seeking support as an indication of weakness and would rather let it brew inside. But on a side note, being vulnerable is actually a sign of courage, and it shows someone who's self-aware. And then last one is seek professional help. If anxiety and panic attacks are a recurring feature in your life, then I highly recommend seek professional help. With the advancement in medical science, psychotherapy and medication, these are very effective methods to reduce the impact of anxiety in our daily lives. While the lifestyle choices, they form like a lifelong endeavor. What does one do if they're experiencing anxiety or its more severe form, a panic attack? A panic attack is a feeling of losing complete control. Now, they can be so intense that a person who's experienced it reports the feeling of having a heart attack or even dying. Anxiety and panic attacks can affect anyone, so do not be ashamed of it. As you can see on the slide, Michael Phelps has been dealing with anxiety for a major part of his life. In fact, it's more common than we think. Globally, 1 in 13 people have anxiety. In fact, in India alone, 45 million suffer from anxiety, and these are just the recorded numbers. So we need to look at anxiety as any other condition that needs to be managed. There are some approaches that we can use to handle anxiety and panic attacks. The first one is to disarm your thoughts. A natural thought process at the time of a panic attack is, what is happening to me? Or why is this happening to me? Now, this thinking pattern makes you dig a deeper hole at that time of the attack, putting you in a continuous loop of spiraling out of control. So instead, disarm your thought by saying, so what? Because now you understand that there isn't any actual threat. So what this does, it helps break the negative loop of panic thoughts and begins to calm you down. The second step is to use the bring it on approach. Now, this is a counterintuitive approach to handling anxiety. Instead of resisting the responses, you allow your nervous system to play out the cycle. The catch-22 here is this. The more you resist it, the longer the anxiety cycle becomes. Now, I understand this is difficult, but tell yourself, I am not scared of this, and demand your brain to bring it on. This will shorten the anxiety cycle, because remember this, panic attacks cannot kill you. And there's an ancient Chinese phrase that's apt for this. It's known as Zilau, that translates as paper tiger. It refers to something that seems threatening, but is ineffectual. That's exactly what anxiety or panic attack is. It's a paper tiger, scary, but actually harmless. The third step is to divert your attention. In this approach, engage with something that takes your full attention. Now, what that means is once you've diffused the initial fear and allowed the anxiety to play out, you should then ride out this declining wave of anxiety by occupying yourself with an activity that completely engages your mind. It could be anything. Pick up a magazine, start reading, focus on any specific task, or have a conversation with someone. Doing this will prevent you from getting hooked back into the anxiety loop. Look, my main aim today, besides discussing the methods to cope with stress and anxieties, is also to invite you to develop an empowering outlook to leverage anxiety and create a stronger identity and character. One philosophy that I personally follow and recommend for any sort of growth, whether it's physical or mental, is to respect and embrace the struggle of moving out of your comfort zones. Initially, it is extremely unpleasant. But you realize that all growth and progress comes beyond our comfort zones. For instance, people who exercise regularly are aware that a strenuous workout routine is followed by muscular pain. Why? Because there's wear and tear of the muscle fibers. But when these fibers heal, they make the muscles stronger than what they were. Over time, if you wish to keep building and strengthening that muscle, you have to undergo continuous cycles of wear and tear and recovery. In the same manner, think of anxiety as emotional wear and tear. So embracing this process of emotional wear and tear followed by recovery will help us become mentally resilient and more prepared. So here's what I humbly suggest. We should try and mold our perspectives to tie our identity as someone who is capable of overcoming any challenges that life throws at us. Now let's see how we can do that. The first approach is the pain and pleasure theory. One of the surest methods of changing thought patterns is by associating massive pain to the thought patterns which are holding you back. Similarly, associate massive pleasure to the new desirable thought patterns and actions. So for example, if your anxiety is holding you back from speaking your mind in a meeting or a work setting or even a relationship, start associating a lot of pain with all the things that you will miss out if you don't speak up. Similarly, associate pleasure with the possibility of your opinion being heard and having a healthy communication channel. This was the pain and pleasure theory. The other step is shift perspective. See, in clinical psychology, flipping one's perspective of by consciously choosing a new and positive perspective to fearful situations is known as arousal reappraisal. An apt example to describe this is the fear of public speaking or glossophobia. This is the most common phobia and is considered to be more scary than the fear of snakes, spiders, and even death for some people. Surprisingly, when people who are skilled at public speaking may claim to experience excitement before an event, the ones who would rather be bitten by a snake and die than stand up on a podium and speak experience panic instead. So fear and excitement are two sides of the same coin. The secret is learning how to flip your perception of these sensations from negative to positive. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by a challenge and perceive it as a threat, repeat this phrase in your mind. I am excited by this, until you feel a shift in how you perceive that nervous energy. The next step is to create an empowering alternative. Your older pattern needs to be replaced by a new set of empowering alternative routines. Just as an example, suppose you begin to regularly have panic attacks and you're not sure how to deal with it. You visit a medical professional who prescribes medication to help with the panic attacks. Now you experience and read about certain side effects of the medicine and you realize that they are quite harsh for you. At that time, you start associating pain with the idea of having panic attacks for the rest of your life. And you start associating pleasure with the goal to completely beat this. So you decide to shift your perspective on it and set a personal challenge for yourself by changing your lifestyle. You start eating well, you meditate, exercise regularly. You have successfully created a new empowering alternative for yourself. A few months of discipline and maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and you can actually become anxiety-free with this new empowering alternative. And the fourth one is to reinforce and reward new behaviors. Once it's clear that those new alternatives have shown positive results, be sure to be consistent with it. This consistency will decide whether you can keep the anxiety at bay for good or not. To maintain consistency, you would also need to reward and appreciate yourself every time you're able to follow through with your plan. Positive reinforcements have almost a magical way to rewire our brain's pleasure response. And this ensures that we keep repeating this reward pattern. Now, I understand that the legal profession is very, very competitive. But having stress or anxiety does not mean that you do not have what it takes to be the best at what you do. It just means that you need to be more aware of how to handle your mind's hypersensitivity. That's all. People who wrongly feel that if one suffers from stress or anxiety, it may not be possible to function normally. not only can we function completely normally, there are many achievers who have proved that we can attain world-class success despite those things. In fact, American, Israeli, and Canadian studies have demonstrated that people who worried more on average had higher IQs. So therefore, research has shown that there is a strong correlation between anxiety and intelligence. Let's look at a list of some personalities who have succeeded in life despite anxiety. Let's look at these names on your screen. Oprah Winfrey, Stephen Colbert, Chris Evans, Leonardo DiCaprio, Bill Gates, Adele. These are all achievers in their fields. Adele, in fact, regularly has panic attacks, and she once told Rolling Stone magazine that I am scared of audiences. A performer of her level is also scared of audiences. She said that one show in Amsterdam, she was so nervous she escaped from the fire exit. I, in fact, tried to dig out names of political leaders or lawyers who may have anxiety, but unsurprisingly, I couldn't find any who had come out with this information publicly. This, in fact, shows the taboo attached to stress and anxiety. I want to end today's talk with something that resonates with me. In Japan, there is an ancient technique called kintsugi, which is the art of repairing broken ceramic bowls by filling the cracks with gold resin, so that when the bowl is repaired, it makes it more beautiful and valuable. Similarly, our shortcomings and challenges that we face in life, including things like stress and anxiety, may lead to cracks in our spirit, but our ability to overcome them is the gold resin that makes us more beautiful and valuable. So we should use anxiety and stress as an opportunity to become stronger and more confident in our abilities to overcome challenges. I'll conclude with an old English proverb. A smooth sea never made a skillful sailor. If anyone wishes to get in touch with me, you can take a picture of the information on this slide. You can also visit my website and find me on social media platforms to see more of my content. I hope I was able to convey my message clearly. I also provide one-to-one coaching to people who are serious about upgrading their lives or businesses. And if you work in an organization where you feel I could add some value, feel free to get in touch with me and we can discuss how we could work together. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gauri. It was a wonderful session. Thank you very much. Whenever I used to give presentations, I used to end with something like this. When it rains, look for rainbows. And when it is dark, if you are in the night, look for the stars. Complaining, you'll have 101 things to complain about. But positive things, if you concentrate and work on your weaknesses or those things which are putting you down, maybe anybody can excel or come out better. Ramkumar sir, your thoughts on that?
True to his name, Chaitanya was shedding light into our thought process. During these days of pandemic attack, what do you call?
Lockdown and pandemic, everybody is stressed.
Pandemic attack and this panic attack, they go together. The from actionable to actionable plan. Wonderful.
Thank
In
you.
fact, I have personally always noticed that when I am on a multitask mission, I am more at home. I have a lot of tasks to be at a time. I am more at home. Maybe then what should I say? It was a real exposure. Maybe hopefully tomorrow my webinar lecture will be with a clean slate, not empty slate, clean slate.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. If coming from you, sir, it means a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramkumar sir. Yes, over to Justice Roshan Dalvi, ma'am.
Yes, it was really nice. I'm quietly listening. It's not my subject. I've got only to learn. It is good. It is really nice. But I don't feel stressed when I work, really.
Ma'am, then you've attained eustress. You are an inspiration.
I might feel stressed if I didn't.
So we have a Seena with a question. Seena, please, go ahead.
So good evening. So my question is, sir said during this, am audible, sir?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. So sir said during the strain time or the stress time, this is happening due to the secretion of the hormones, right, sir?
Sorry, ma'am. Could
Hello,
you
sir.
repeat that?
So this stress or strain during those time,
Mhm.
this happens due to the secretion of the hormones to our blood, right, sir?
So, I mean, stress again, it could be a perceived threat, it could be an actual threat. So, regardless of the situation, the physiological response can be similar. But how we perceive an actual or a situation is really up to us. That is where the perception of how we look at a situation comes into play. So,
Okay.
chemicals are every decision that we take will involve a secretion of some chemicals in the brain for sure.
Okay, sir. Sir, due to that action, some this stress used to cause some reflex action over us, no, sir? Due to this secretion of these hormones to our blood.
Well,
I
I
mean
mean,
the
if
reflex
it is
action.
again, if you remember the pathways that I explained, if it is come to a point where your body needs to act and it doesn't have the time to think, that assessment will be made by the brain. We are actually co-passengers at that point. So if it follows the pathway of the amygdala, you won't even have to tell yourself I have to act. It'll just act. That is what reflex action basically is. But the
Okay.
time when you say, if you talk to somebody and you feel that, oh, that person was that person made me upset, that's when
Stress management is a doctor.
that's when your the pathway of your cortex plus amygdala has been activated, because you're consciously being aware of how you want to see a situation. That's not a reflex action at that point.
Okay, sir. Sir, can we say that this stress and reflex action, they are mutually connected with each other?
So no, I mean, distress is an intensity of stress. That's all. Now I may not be distressed during a reflex action. I may be distressed after it, having felt that, oh, I went through an experience that was slightly difficult. But distress is just an intensity of stress, so that's fine. I mean, it's a different concept altogether. Reflex action is basically to protect ourselves. That's all.
Okay, sir. One more doubt is that, sir, whether this reflex action that can be reduced by the sir has suggested 5 or 6 methods for reducing the stress and strain. So whether this reflex action that can be reduced due to this meditation or this sir has said other modes, no, sir, whether it can be reduced to that modes.
Yes, there is enough research and progress in science today that medication have a definite impact. But personally, I like to kind of attack it from all sides: lifestyle, mindset, perspective shift, and medication if required. Every case doesn't require medication. It's only when you feel that you need to you need to kind of artificially alter the chemical flow at some point, you want to go to have medication. Because anything that you're putting externally, I mean, there is that trade-off. But with the science and technology today, it's a fairly certain way to control your anxiety. But you're always more able to kind of take it as improve it on a consistent basis if you're able to work on it like a lifestyle, like the 9 points that I was mentioning. Breathing, when you feel it's an oncoming thing, start breathing, relax, exercise regularly, eat healthier. A lot of things that we keep having so many aerated drinks also. These things are all stimulants. They actually increase the sensitivity inside. So you correct these basic things and your need to perhaps have medication may also come down. Of course, it's case specific at the end of the day. But
okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sina. We have Farida Fanaswala with a question. Please, Farida.
I do not have a question. I was just thanking Mr. Chaitanya for the nice scientific analysis that he has given us. Because once it's analyzed in parts, whatever the stress is, the differences of levels of stress, then you know how to tackle it in a very perfect way.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think as lawyers, what we are trained to do first and foremost is be over prepared with the research. So that training has come in handy. I tried to skim it down to the bare minimum right now. But I'm glad at least the message was able to be communicated.
And being a yoga teacher, I can understand maybe much better.
How wonderful. How wonderful.
Thank you, Farida. We have Ramshad. You put a question there, please. You can
yes,
just for thanking you. A very wonderful session was.
Thank you.
The role of therapy, mind therapy, is what is the role of that in our working situation or study situation, something?
It's very important. See, therapy again comes down to you having somebody to speak with. And the idea really is that if you don't have a support group or people around you who you can kind of confide to or talk to, or you don't feel that they may have the tools to understand what you're saying, that's what therapy is really for, because those people are trained to understand the psychology behind what's happening. Like today, the presentation that we went through, just by being aware of the fact that, oh, am I in eustress or am I in distress, will just increase your awareness about, oh, so if I'm in distress, what can I do to come down to eustress? How can I shift my perspective? Those kind of things are really helpful. Those tools are also provided in therapy, apart from you getting somebody to speak to, which in itself is a huge way to reduce your mental burdens. So therapy is fantastic. If therapy is seeming like a more permanent approach to you at a point where you don't want to really engage in something so formal, speak to someone who's either gone through the same issues, or speak to a senior. We are so lucky to have so many seniors in this profession who love to be mentors. So speak to them. And we normally underestimate we feel that just because we see someone successful today, we don't realize that the person may have also gone through similar issues like the ones that we go through. Human mind is the same. They just lived in a earlier era and they have more experience today. In the same manner, you will learn and you will pass on more information to your juniors. Speak to some senior, and I'm telling you, the minute you be vulnerable and speak to a senior, you will 100% find support, 100%, and that's pretty much as good as therapy.
So one more doubt is, what is the role of listening in our case management? Listening
in case management?
In client management and case management. That's in that way.
From a psychological point of view, you just seem more intelligent if you listen more. That's just a scientific fact. So how you want to use that fact is up to you. But oftentimes clients come with so much grievance that if you just hear them out, you realize that really the nub of the issue is one small ego issue with his brother. That's all. So if you just listen to him, you can actually counsel and help them avoid that entire 10-year process of appeals and all that. So listening, I think, is a great skill. It's a great skill, and it's a need that we have to develop, as a skill in this profession, for sure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Somebody once said that you listen only to reply and not to understand.
Yes.
Just for that. We have Advocate Vincent Joseph putting the hands up. Please, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the excellent and enlightening talk, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And our mind is like a monkey. And that we cannot, so many thoughts pass through our mind. Now, how can we can you give me some concrete tips to achieve concentration? Suppose when you are in the work, you think about your home. When you are at home, you think about your work. So naturally, we are all in a restless mood. So we lack concentration, and can you give some tips for achieving concentration?
Personally, meditation does wonders. Meditation is literally that art which helps you focus on something despite the million thoughts that come to your head. Now, meditation, some people kind of somewhere may resist it thinking, oh, it's spiritual or it's religious. No, don't look at it like that. Just sit and just close your eyes and go observe your breathing. That's a skill. So like every skill that you need to develop, this skill of concentration is also something that no one's just born with. It's something you develop. So you see top performers or athletes, people who perform at the peak levels in Olympics and all, they have extreme amounts of concentrations. That's something they have developed over the decades. So it's something that you keep doing. Now, every time if you're sitting in office and you're thinking about work, maybe in that moment, the first step is have that awareness that, oh, my mind is going there. My mind is going there. So now you bring it back. keep doing it, keep bringing it back. Eventually you'll notice that your awareness to where your mind is going will increase, and then with time it'll stop wandering as much as it did on the first day. That's 100% going to affect. And then other than that, a basic tip would be to create a favorable environment. So if I'm working here in my office, this is not a place where I would nap. This is not a place where I would eat. This is like if you go to a temple, you will just pray there. That place has an aura, that place has an energy that automatically makes you feel more rejuvenated. If I stand on the street and I start praying, I'll have so many sounds and distractions. So if you create an environment for your work where it is conducive for work only, if it helps shut down your mobile for an hour work, that will 100% help you channelize more, because the distractions that we have today is just, there are a million distractions, emails and notifications every second. So you create that environment which makes it easier for yourself to resist distractions.
One more question can I have?
So please.
In the beginning of your talk, you are given two scenarios.
Yes.
Scenario number 1 and scenario number 2. Now, what about 90-10 principle? There are certain situations which are beyond our control. There are certain situations which are within our control.
Yes, sir.
I think the second scenario, thing is that suppose, is it not within our control? When you analyze the situation, can we say it is within our control? The first scenario may not be within our control, but the second scenario, definitely, is it not within our control? Suppose if you have some sort of rhythm, if you have some system, how you do the things, suppose if you have that way, you could manage it, you know.
Absolutely, sir. It comes down to being how organized we can be. But even the most perfectionist will make mistakes. That's just being human. So there will be, and the problem is that we may be perfectly bringing every code file with every note, every judgment, copies for the court, the right kind of judgment, everything for 364 days. But the problem will be that one day that you forget. So that can also happen. And it happens, it will happen to the, I mean, this is a forum where everybody has, gone through that. So it will happen, but if it helps, what I used to do, I would keep a checklist on all my files. I would tick bare act, this is I would write in front of the file bare acts, judgment. So that would just make it more tangible for me to know that if I've missed out something. So it just comes down to organizational skills, but still mistakes can happen. But the problem is how you react once you realize you made a mistake. That's what really the perspective shift is all about.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We have Sujita Subramanian. Sujita, please.
There could be omission even in the checklist.
That of course.
Yeah, so Chaitanya, I was actually wondering about something that you mentioned during your presentation. So you said that you were not able to find names of high-profile politicians, and I also noticed there were no high-profile lawyers, for that matter, in your list of people who have admitted that they have struggled with stress and anxiety and so on and so forth. Now, given the taboo, which is also a word that you use, that exist within the legal fraternity in relation to admission of personal stress, anxiety levels, and so on and so forth, I am assuming that you present yourself as a career coach as opposed to someone who is able to provide some sort of medical support. I suppose you don't have the medical remit for that anyway.
Right.
But if you do come across an individual who comes to you for support, do you think that you are adequately tooled to scope out whether this person needs medical attention as opposed to a discussion with a career coach? And if you do understand that, and if you were to convey to the person, do you convey to the person firstly? But if you do convey to the person, what sort of reaction do you normally notice from the people who approach you?
All right. Now, that's a great question, ma'am. I think it's an important question. So, the idea here and this discussion, the idea behind this is really that these communications have to become more public and more open, and people should stop resisting it so much. Now, if someone's facing anxiety, that's fine. That's just one more, that's a chemical reaction of the brain. It's as simple as that. But especially in this profession where the main asset that we feel is our intellect, if we admit to stress or anxiety, it feels like there is a attack on our intellect, and therefore we feel, what are we if we are not, intellectually superior? That's unfortunately, it comes from a place of just taboo. So what we need to really do is keep having communications such as this, spread this word. If somebody comes to me and within a conversation or two, you kind of can figure out if this person is at a point where he or she needs immediate medical intervention, or is it just a place where that habit, that there's such a strong habit of looking at a situation in that very manner, where a disempowering belief just becomes the platform for thinking, right? If one can get through with that discussion, it may also take a few sessions, that why are you thinking like this? Is there a reason behind this? Then well and good. Otherwise, you need to refer, because the idea is to get that person better, get that person feel functionally better. That's the idea. It's not about how many I can retain or how many go there. It's about helping another person. The reason I came into this profession is because I come with a mindset of serving. I want to give back way more than I receive. And that's really what I'm attempting to do. So I am in touch with, psychologists, and I did in fact a webinar for a clinical psychology clinic as well. It is very important, if you feel that somebody needs that help, refer it to them, because it's an ecosystem that even in the legal fraternity, there are times when somebody comes to you with a criminal brief, and you say that, this is not in my comfort zone. I do IP matters. Let me refer to you to someone who does criminal law. Now, the idea behind that is that you want that person to get what that person wants. Similarly, even in this, you create that ecosystem of help. If it's not within our domain, we look for we help that person look for that person who can be effective for that solution.
Thank you for that, but you didn't cover the last point.
I'm sorry.
What is their response when you do ask them to move on?
See, these are very subjective things. It's not, I can't really say that ages 5 to 10 respond like this, ages 30 to 40. It's so subjective. There are people who are, whose identity somewhere imprisoned with them, feeling that I am perfect. And then there are people who are more open to having a growth mindset. So those people who are more open to having a growth mindset are normally more receptive. They don't immediately shut down ideas. So, and also there are ways. You don't just tell the person, I think you need medical. That's not the way to. You kind of understand, do they really need it? Or how much of it do they need? Is there something that they can do around it? Or some people are just more comfortable directly going to a psychiatrist, or some people are more comfortable going to a therapist, or some people are just comfortable speaking with a life coach and getting those perspectives sorted out. It's a very subjective thing, so it's difficult to say. Like, it's literally like saying, what do we tell a client when they come to us for relief? Every client is different. Every client has different needs and different approaches, different mindsets, different backgrounds, and they will think accordingly basis those. So,
thank you, Chaitanya. Sujita, we'll continue this day after tomorrow when you address on our 80th session. We'll see the distinction between free speech and defamation. All well in Liverpool. Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujita. And we have Nitin with a question. Nitin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shyam sir. Sir, I had a question about, it's about stress management. I always have felt about that there's a fear inside the mind that if I don't follow a particular route, something bad will happen to me. If I don't go by this particular road, then I am not able to get something. And like that feeling is always there in the mind. And second thing is that something will happen to me, or worried about my health also. Nothing would happen to me. These two things are always bothering. Maybe in this lockdown era, I could attend Shamsa's lecture, and secondly, I could do meditation and pranayam, which had really helped me out. So how to change this mental attitude, which I am having this problem? I feel that always I am negative about something would bad happen if I don't follow this particular route, or if I don't go this way. No, I have to sit in this car on this chair only. I can't sit on the other side. That is kind of a thing I have. So
also,
I
it's
don't
a
know how.
superstition-based thing, is what you're asking, or?
No, it's with me I'm talking about. I'm always feeling if I don't sit on the second to my sister, then whatever work I'm going to do, it will not happen. If I'll not stand front, I'll not. So that kind of feeling I'm always getting. I don't know, since when I was in a child, I used to get good marks in the schools. I used to say, no, I have to follow this route, then I'll get good marks in the school. So that is there with me. That is honestly, I'm telling you, this is there with me.
And that's always happened when you followed those routes. That's always happened every time.
No, but I did though. I don't know. That's there in my subconscious mind, which I never ever share with anybody. Now somehow I shared with this to my sister and with my mother and one of close friend. Otherwise, I didn't share with anybody that I have such kind of psychology that I follow this.
Well,
but I did meditation, sir. But I really felt inside inner peace. I do it for 1 hour every day. I do it nowadays.
Very good. Very good. No, I'm saying that when you follow a certain custom that you feel will be the only way you get that result, is it 100% result that you get, or there are deviations to that? That is
no,
it. If
sir.
you don't
I get like that. If I don't follow, then something good bad happen to me. I have to follow. Like that, it comes in my mind. That 3:30 sir's lecture, I have to log in for 3:30. I can't be at 3:35. That's what I'm saying. So that's how it's been happening to me always from school days.
See, one example is that normally when we were children, when our school days, you used to say, if I take a particular pen and write the examination, I will get good marks. So that is a faith that people have developed in childhood sometimes.
Yeah.
But that will change by experience, because even without that pen, you can carry on. Such an attitude has been developed by ourselves. I think so that can be overcome, because that everything depends upon how to change your attitude.
Absolutely.
No, but I think I have some fear. I don't know. I'm 31 now.
No, that fear. See, no, that fear, because that is happening, because it's my analysis of things. What I find from general things is nowadays, present younger generation are afraid of facing a failure.
Yes.
Probably one thing is that even parents are also to some extent responsible for that, because they will always compare you with others.
Yes.
If you are not able to perform as others were doing,
yes,
then they will create an impression in you. You are inferior to those people. So that inferior complex that is being created in you, sometimes develop a inferiority complex in yourself, that unless I do a particular thing in a particular way, I will not succeed. Maybe sometimes he may succeed. Suppose if he did not succeed, if you think, analyze it and say, why do I have not done? Bar that faith that if I have not done it in particular way, so I lost it. Change it. Once you change it and think that you can think another way, how the other people are doing it, you compare them for that purpose. How they are overcoming those things, how they are prospering in their activities. Analyze and then take the normally it's always better to take good practices from others. Nothing wrong in it. See, if you develop that attitude of choosing good habit, good practices from others, develop that attitude and apply it. You may succeed or may not succeed. Then also you should not be defeated. That way you will have to develop error. See, everything is trial and error method only in your life. Always no method is going to be said it is a perfect way you can complete things.
What do you say, Mr. Chaitanya Puri?
Yes, sir.
Well, your views.
Well, Nitin, although sir has summed it up perfectly, and I was also learning while he was speaking, but I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents here as well. See, you mentioned the word fear. All right. Now, fear generally could be of some certain kinds, right? So there is either a fear of some sort of a loss, or there is a fear of doing something difficult, or the fear of failing, or the fear of the unknown. Okay. Now, when we talk about loss, fear of loss, it's better in this situation to direct and refocus your thoughts on what you could gain by overcoming your fear, as opposed to what you would lose. So it's important to think of the long-term benefits to refocus, so that your short-term fear that we are getting by staying safe is overcome by us. When it comes to doing something difficult, the fear of doing something difficult, anything that is out of your comfort zone will be difficult. And currently, because you've formed this habit of, since for the last so many years, it may be difficult for you to break this habit. And whenever it's hard, we tend to avoid it. But the mastery in life is to embrace change and jump out of your comfort zone. So challenge your brain, challenge your body, give it a new task and see your performance get better. Start seeing challenges and difficulties as a good thing, which puts you on a fast track to growth and evolution. When it comes to fear of failing, many of us simply choose to freeze and not take any action, simply because there is a chance of failure. Now just think about this. Isn't there a chance of failure for everything? What is 100% sure? Nothing. So when you were a baby and you tried to walk, you must have fallen a lot of times. Did you just give up and think, I guess I'll just crawl my whole life? No, you kept walking, right? That's the idea. That's the motivation with which you have to operate in life for any fear. And for the fear of unknown, we fear that, everything that we don't know, we fear that. So if you educate yourself about what you fear, you realize that monster isn't as scary as you think. Currently, with so many years of you having done the same thing, it's become the only way your body and mind reacts. It's basically your neural pathways have become so strong there that that's the only way it's reacting. So you need to rewire that brain by action. Exactly do the counter action towards that. Over time, it's like breaking a habit and building a new routine. So you start by doing baby steps. If you feel that I have to sit next to my sister to be able to do well in ABC, try it in a different manner. Break that habit, work doubly hard. The minute you start seeing that, yes, you can get results without having to follow those customs, you'll realize that it's possible. And then keep breaking away from each custom like that. Earn those rewards on your own. That it's doable. If you got results as a student, you got it because you wrote well in the exam. Because enough number of us have written Om on the paper and come. It doesn't work. You have to write the correct answers. So if you got your marks, you earned it on your own. So you have that confidence in your abilities as well.
Chaitanya, you are superb during your free speech.
Rather than the presentation.
Yes.
Ouch, sir. Ouch.
Super.
Thank you, sir.
We have a question posted by Rekha Rivi Raja. Rekha, can you unmute and put the question, or should I read it out? Are you there, Rekha?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, this class was really enlightening. It was useful for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So my question is I'm preparing for some government exams where I have to keep so many sections, judgments, all the latest judgments, the historical, everything in mind. How do I remember those things, and how do I keep it in mind? In fact, I have started doing it by mnemonics and all. Still, I have the difficulty.
There is a good hack when it comes to basically remembering more things, which is understand the concept first more than the fine points of it. When you understand the conceptual background of a thing, the retention, so there is a short-term memory, and there is repetition, and then there is a long-term memory. Enough repetitions of something in the short-term memory pushes that into the long-term memory, which is where we kind of recall things from. So when you understand a concept more than just the mnemonics, you are more able to retain them for a longer period of time. All right. Another thing that I normally do is, if I read something which I've understood a bit of, I'll start explaining it to somebody else within, say, my family or my friend. The minute you are explaining it, you realize that teaching it is also a great way to memorize a concept. Apart from that, fact of the matter is, the competitive exam that you are giving is a place where they will test this cognitive fitness. So it requires you to kind of push beyond your comforts. So yeah, mnemonics and all have to be done. That's part of the Indian system. You have to push a lot into your rote memory, but conceptually, if you remember something, if you understand the thing, it's just a better way to memorize things for the long term. Another thing would be keep doing it regularly. If you study something today, don't assume it's done. Before you start what you have to do for tomorrow, read it once more, what you did yesterday. Similarly, for the third day, read the last 2 days. Just repetition, and it just gets ingrained, and engraved in your mind a little more deeper. I mean, that's all. Other than that, concentration should be good. Avoid distractions so that whatever time you're spending in your work or learning, you're able to maximize that output rather than just sitting at a desk, which is what a lot of students feel. They say that I've studied for 3 hours. Now that's a wrong yardstick. You can sit for 3 hours, but it's difficult to actually maintain concentration for more than an hour. Like experts can maintain a concentration for more than 3 hours. That's all. So, you just try and increase your concentration, focus on what you have to do. Your emotional state should be conducive and nice and not in a state of panic or stress. And another trick is there's a thing called the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if so what this thing is that it says that you study for 25 minutes without any distractions. Okay. Then take a 5-minute break because your mind can optimum performance can run for only 25 minutes for an average human. After the 5-minute break, do it for another 25 minutes and then 5-minute break. So that 25 minute of surge knowledge that you'll, impose onto yourself will have a greater chance of retention. That's just another way to study.
Talking about phenomenal memory.
Can I add one sentence on judgments?
Right.
On judgments. From the, you go backwards from the latest judgment. Go backwards from the latest judgment.
Absolutely. Great tip. Great tip.
So
See, that's what experience does. See, sir knew the answer and he waited for me to finish. He had the answer all along.
Most of the interview, they will ask for the latest judgment. So go backwards from the latest judgment. That will put you in good stead.
Yeah.
That's my experience. Okay, thank you.
Speaking about phenomenal memory, reproduction of judgments, who else we can think of? Over to you, Prem.
He's a ready reckoner.
Prem, your comments.
Well, it was indeed a very good talk, Chaitanya. But I need to talk about one thing. Before I tell you, there is a good stress and bad stress, right?
Yes.
I really love a bit of stress because it really helps me to meet my day-to-day challenges and it persuades me rather to meet my deadlines. So I think all my tasks are proficiently accomplished because of my stress. And I have even felt that it boosts my alertness and memory. A moderate amount of stress, I'm saying. It has powerful benefits also.
Yes.
Because I really felt that it is just like a spice in your food in its right proportion.
Yes, absolutely.
Right proportion means it really enhances the flavor of one's own life, one's own memory, your physique, everything. And it really, according to me, is a spark which drives me to achieve more and improve the quality of my life. This is my personal perspective. I don't know how many of you would agree to me, but this is my personal perspective because sometimes I really feel being stressed is also good.
Absolutely, sir. You're absolutely right.
Anyway, thank you so much for your wonderful talk.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the 78th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. Thank you, Chaitanya Puri, for that wonderful presentation, wonderful interaction, and all those made this platform so interesting by putting questions, exchanging ideas, exposing us to new vistas of knowledge and new things which we never thought. I mean, stress I thought was there always, and I never thought of handling it scientifically or otherwise. Thanks to you, at least I have a relook into what I've been doing till now.
Thank you.
Thank you for the valuable presence of Ram Kumar sir, Justice Ramakrishnan sir, Justice Roshan Dalvi sir, and all of you. And thanks again to Dr. Amit George for introducing you to this platform. We hope to have you here again. And tomorrow we'll have a wonderful session on vicarious liability under criminal law by Sri Gautam Chowdhury. He's the director of Jharkhand Judicial Academy, and the topic will be introduced by Justice Nagamuthu. So till then, we meet tomorrow. Stay stress-free, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.